Hello class, let's take a look at your assignment 9, the abstract filter art submissions. I hope everybody is watching this part of the video, even if your last name starts with a later letter, and so you want to skip ahead, but at least watch this section so you know what I'm grading on. Since it's abstract art, part of what I'm going to be grading on is just making sure you submitted it at the right resolution, the right size, the right file type. In other words, it shouldn't be like a PSD that's 7 inches by 12 inches at 300 pixels per inch. It should be the PNG. I might have said in the video is JPEG, so I'm going to leave that open. It's been a while since I recorded those videos, and I've forgotten when I rewatched it to keep my ears perked up for that. So I'm just going to say PNG or JPEG is fine. I want to make sure that you have the right resolution and the right size. Yeah, those guys are going to account for like 30 points right off the bat. So you're already in good standing as long as you've done the basic stuff I said to do right here. Remember, I'm going to be making sure that you named it correctly as well. I'm going to be looking for areas of visual interest. There shouldn't be any colors that seem out of place. So in other words, if you have one spot of orange that's appeared and everything else is either blue or green or maybe purple or something, and then you have like one orange flake just sitting there, I'm going to assume that that was an accident. You want to kind of have either uniformity in your color palette, or you want to move from one set of colors to another one in a way that makes sense. And you'll see what I mean as we get into these. You shouldn't just have one section that has some random colors that don't match the feel of or tone of the rest of the image. If that happens, then I'm going to assume that the colors got a little out of control when you were filtering. It should be clear that you used more than one filter and then more than one layer. It shouldn't look like you just kind of had everything smushed around in one place, which happens sometimes. I'm hoping that you've pushed forward the interesting areas and pushed back the stuff you didn't like. And you can do that in a number of ways: dodge and burn, or lightening and darkening, multiply, filters, all that good stuff. It should be clear that you spent time on this project. So if you have stuff that looks like it was put together in 3 seconds, even if it ended up taking you 20 hours, you probably need to do a different submission for that. That's kind of how it goes. And hopefully it looks like you've explored a bit, but we'll know for sure going in. Don't forget that this part is worth 90 points. You've got to go over to the link that's provided in here and just kind of chit chat a little bit about your assignment and reply. Whoops, my images didn't load this time. That's fine. If I refresh, will come in, but instead I will just move on. Let's take a look at our first submission. Okay, so one thing I normally say is try to avoid having stuff thrown in the center of the image. It gets hard to balance out, and there are a lot of like swirls and twirls and whirls and stuff that Photoshop will do, and will plop it right in the middle. And so you end up needing to do stuff in those cases like zooming in to crop out, or having it on another layer and sliding it around, that sort of stuff. Now that said, I think this one's working okay. You notice that there's a gradient in the colors that's going on, so along with these areas of interest and detail appearing above it, so you don't really focus as much on the background. So I think it's pulling it together pretty well. But first things first, let's go over and see. It is 14 by 11 inches, and that's what I wanted. It is RGB, that's great. It's 150 pixels. It is named correctly, 9, last name, first name, number, and it's ping. So great, all that's good to go. So let's get into this. Let's take a look real quick, remembering some of our techniques that we have from early in the semester. What happens if we do stuff like multiply or screen or overlay, just to see what that does to everything, and then maybe knock down the opacity a bit, or the fill opacity, depending on if you're in multiply, for example. You can kind of play with it a little bit, but I don't know. I think that something's lost there, so I'll just kind of get rid of that. Although it does bring up an interesting point. What happens if we come in with a curve? What do we got in here? We see that we can actually push and pull a little bit on the image just using curves. and get maybe a better contrast, a little more interesting. But you notice how careful you have to be, because immediately you have to start worrying about the color. Now on this one, all the colors look like they're in control. We've got these fuchsias and these blues and these purples. Everything looks like it was selected on purpose. There's not like a big flake of some weird color that you wouldn't have expected given the rest of the image. For example, if you just came in and had, I don't know, one spot of green on here that was, I appear to be on the wrong layer. There we go. One spot of green on here that did not appear anywhere else. You just had one like sitting there at 100%. I would say that's not under control. It wouldn't make any sense. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the image. It doesn't really match the rest of the color scheme. But without, that nonsense I just put on, everything fits, everything works. I think that that's working out pretty well. With curves, we can control it, but we do have to watch out. Keep in mind that curves does give you the ability to put it in a luminosity mode so that you can make things lighter or darker without affecting the color. And then you can come in and affect things like vibrance. So you could maybe turn up or down the saturation. I think maybe a little less saturation might be a little more appealing, but maybe a little more vibrance with that. So get this nice little increase in the blue, but maybe not. Maybe you don't feel that way. I think that a little bit of the darkening in the background, though, works pretty well with the curves. I think that makes these, I think these are octagons. 1, 2, 3, 4, or hexagons. What do we got? Yeah, hexagons. Well, one of those. This lovely shape here. These shapes are clearly the area of interest. I like these. Oh, I like these lines up here, too. Those are interesting. It might be fun to bring those out a little bit. Let's try that with another curves. Got to be careful. So we can, but now we're getting into some weird territory in the middle, but that's not a problem. You can go into the mask, grab a brush, and then just paint this away. This is just a nice big soft brush. If I alt click, you can see big and soft. Okay, press D on the keyboard to get my defaults, X to flip them around. By defaults, I mean my default colors. Can come in here and get those going. And in fact, we're losing a bit of the lovely gradation, so I'd probably bring that back in. So you could just do some filter adjustments. I keep thinking of filters, some adjustment layers on here to kind of change the look and feel. I don't really like the vibrance filter, and I missed when I was deleting it. I think just these two curves, probably the way to go. It pushes the background back a little bit more, and it brings in the area of focus to these shapes. In fact, I might even suggest cropping in just a little bit. I don't want to lose this gradient that you have, but as we move in, you can see that the move this out of the way. You can see that the all the excess stuff going on in the background, that's kind of a repetition, that's gone now. Now we just have these interesting shapes, this wonderful static, these lovely curves that are twirling around on everything. We've got all that going on, and I think it's a bit more of an interesting composition than if we just have the whole piece. A little less symmetry sometimes can be a good thing. Even though I think you did a good job with handling the symmetry, I think that you could probably get rid of a little bit more just by doing a little zoom and a crop, and I think that you'd be onto something really interesting. I think overall this worked out pretty well. There's some more exploration you could do. Even zooming in more, I think that this is even more interesting than necessarily this composition. But that said, I think you were fairly successful. I think that putting something in the center immediately raises the challenge of the piece, and you addressed that well as you were going through. So overall, good job. So you clearly have more than one layer. You clearly have more than one filter. Your colors are under control. You created areas of interest and you pulled them forward. I'd say these shapes. You've created a focus by pushing areas of disinterest back. Like, for example, this somewhat repetitive background isn't necessarily repetitive anymore because you used the static as a way to blur out the hard lines of this so that it doesn't just appear as sort of a repeating texture across everything. Suddenly this new introduced texture fades that away, and so you don't stare at all these pieces. You have this nice gradient going on in it. I think you have a lot of good stuff happening. That said, I think it's a little bit better to push it a bit with curves, just so that you can get a little more contrast in there. So I'd recommend that. All right, so yeah, overall great job. And after the video, I'll be looking over everybody's little posts that they did about their assignment, making sure that they provided a little image and that they talked about it for a little bit. Okay, let's move on to the next one. BC. Whoa, and see, this is what I'm talking about. So we've got the issue immediately of something, the second one, and already we have another thing in the center. But this was offset by having another seemingly centered piece, but you can see it's not actually. It's moved over to the right a little bit. Again, I think that this is going to cause you more challenges and difficulties than just not having something in the center. I think it's always better when you're exploring like this just to avoid that problem that you have to solve in the first place. But first things first, let's look over everything. The name is almost correct. It's super close. It should be 09-last name-first name- the iteration you're on. In this case, it's the ping though. That is correct. You are not the correct size. It should be 11 by 14. No, and you are not the correct resolution. It should be 150. Just a reminder, I did say it should be the correct size. I also said what that size is, and it is not that. So let's take a quick look. If we did an image size, I'm curious to see if everything were set. Yeah, so the resolution was just wrong. I'm very suspicious that you didn't use the standard file save as, which would be file save as, but instead did some kind of export or save for web, or something strange like that. If you do those things, it will monkey around with your settings. You don't want to do that unless you've read up on the manual what it's doing and you've checked it afterwards. You, at this point, before you submit something, we're like way in. Next assignment that I'm grading is assignment 10. We're way past the halfway point. And not to pick on you specifically, this is for everybody. Before you submit something, you should open it up in Photoshop. You should check that the resolution and the size and that the file type and everything is correct before you turn it in. Your clients are going to expect that of you. If they say, hey, I need a ping with transparency in it, and I need it 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and you send them a 400 pixel JPEG by 400 pixels, they're going to be really mad, and rightfully so. They told you what they wanted, and you didn't do it. You'll need to either explain to them in advance why you're going to be sending them something different, or you need to do what they say, and that's about all that there is to it, so that when pay time comes, they don't have a way of arguing away and say, hey, I don't think I'll pay you because you didn't do what I told you to do. So gotta watch out for that. So just make sure it's the right size going in after you've saved it out. Now that said, let's take a look at the rest of this. Wrong size, it's wrong resolution, it's the correct file type. Are the colors under control? This is a difficult question for me to answer because there's like every color on the planet, but that said, we'll take a look. I would say more or less yes. There are a few colors in here that I don't think I'd recommend. Like what is some of this? I think that probably coming in, desaturating it or recoloring it, or even hitting up with hue and saturation and limiting the colors would have all been appropriate ideas, just so that you have more of a focus. But more or less it's going on. I do not like this weird purple effect that's happening in some of the places. Like here's what I mean. So a few of them, you have this fuchsia going on and it seems to be a match of the screen. Cool. But over here in some of them, you get like this purple that's almost like an illusion being mixed in. Maybe it's just me. It just kind of bothers me a bit. I probably would have picked more of a color palette to stick with and then stuck with it. Why does it say that this is an indexed color? I thought this is not in RGB, so that is not correct either, actually. This is supposed to be RGB, and immediately the colors are better. So that's the other thing, should have been RGB. How do I know that? On the assignment, it says 8-bit RGB ping, and you had it set to index, so watch out on that. Okay, anyway, I'm going to move it to RGB just so that I can do everything I need to do. For example, I'm going to come in with the curves, and I'm going to just take a crack at like the green. And look, if you just remove a few of them, yeah, it's pink or whatever, but now you have more of a selected color palette. From here, I don't think that this is a particularly good color palette, but from here you could do a hue saturation shift. And while I'm at it though, let's set this to color so that it doesn't affect the luminosity. And then I'd probably shift it with hue saturation. And for some reason I can't find it. There we are, hue saturation. And then from here I can go in and I can switch it out. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm doing the saturation instead of the hue. I'm looking at this like, what's going on? On-screen adjustment, control key, and now I can shift the hue. And so from here, I can move it to a different color. So I could bring back the green that I removed. But in doing so, I'm now not just grabbing that green, I'm grabbing the oranges as well. So you're getting, and I did it again, you're getting a different movement. I could also come in and do a hue shift. I'm not liking all those greens. A hue shift maybe to red. Hue shift maybe to blue. And you can see that I have total control over the colors. So I can select what I want and bring those in, bring those out. And you can go in and just adjust the palette however you want to do it. But you can see that you have less of a confetti look and more of a controlled look. Now, that said, there's nothing wrong with the confetti look. You remained, let me get rid of those, you remain consistent with it, which is really what I wanted. I didn't want inconsistent colors. And so, yeah, you had all of the colors, but you consistently had all the colors. So I would say that's all right. I don't see anything with really bizarre saturations. I'm just going to kick in real quick a vibrance, because I'm curious what happens if I knock down the vibrance or increase the vibrance. And same with the saturation. See, if it were like this, I would have been pretty unhappy, but you kept it within control. I think that'll be okay. Get rid of that. Now, that said, we have a sphere, we have some light. Why don't we take advantage of that? I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer. I'm going to make a mask on that new layer of a circle about the same size and shape of your sphere. Make that mask. Now I could come in with a big soft brush and just a dark gray color instead of a black. And I can just kind of paint in. And that is a way too strong an opacity. I'm actually going to kick that down to like 28%. All right. Kind of do a little bit of build up here. Now I'll go for full on black. Maybe even a lower opacity. I'll move this down to 10. Okay. And once I've got that, I'm going to come in and I'm going to set this to a darkening color. Let's try, probably multiply would be my first bet, because we have the fill opacity here we can do the adjustments on. All right, and repeat this process one more time. But this time, Control A, and actually I kind of like it. About twice as dark as that. Anyway, Control A and delete. And this time we'll kick it up to something like screen mode. Just the opposite of multiply. Come in with a not quite white. And 10% opacity is a fine start. Am I on the right layer? I was not. All right. I've overdone it. So what I do in here is just knock down fill opacity a little more. All right. So with those two moves, I went from this to this, where I've shaped this a little bit more. I'd probably want to come in and mask out this shape as well, these little shapes coming around on the spiral, and then maybe add, make it look like it's carved in a little bit, but something kind of like that. And then once you've got all of that going, it might be fun to come in and maybe darken out the background a little bit more, just in some areas, so that you have a real control over the lighting. and really make it kind of pop off the page. And let's take a look at what we can darken it as. I'm probably going to lean right back into my preferred multiply straight off the bat. And probably nowhere near that much multiply. Let's just do it standard opacity this time. There we go. All right, so just with 3 layers, we've really brought in the area of focus on it. So those are kind of the recommendations I'd make for something like this. Come in, just give it some volume, basically, with a little bit of shading. Okay, so that said, you clearly used more than one layer. You clearly used more than one filter. You've created an area of interest. Yeah. You have, oh, what's this here? Your area of interest. Have you pulled these forward? A little bit, yeah, because you've got the big shaping here on your other shape. I'd say that pulls it in. And the areas of disinterest are pushed back. Yeah, you have this gradient darkening it around the edge. I think that pushes it back. Okay, and it's structured. Nothing looks like it was thrown in. It looks like you experimented with the pieces. Then you brought stuff in and out until you were satisfied with it. So yeah, that's about where this is. I think this is where I'd suggest taking it. Just do some shading on it to see what happens. Maybe start coming in from there, doing something like a curves adjustment. I do love my curves. And you can push it even further so that you can get an even better contrast on everything. And you could put it below the sphere, which I think is interesting, so that you have everything darkened a bit going in. If you start not liking where the colors are going on it, it might be fun to come in and do something like this. I'm going to alt drag on this mask I already created to this new layer I've created. You know what? Let's actually not use the layer. Let's get rid of that. Let's do it the easy way. We will instead just do... yeah, let's do color balance. Bring that in. Replace mask. Yes, I just alt dragged to get that. Come in with the color balance. And that will let me on the midtones, the shadows, and the highlights. I can adjust, get rid of stuff. I'm going to make it greener. I need to invert this. Control I on the mask because I'm after the background. Here we go. And I think immediately the color balance, by just pushing into magenta, we reserve the green for the sphere and we pull it forward quite a bit more. Let's hit the highlights. And if that becomes too vibrant, what do we do? Not a problem. We've got a vibrance. And again, you want the same inverted mask, so it leaves the rest alone. So I'm going to alt drag and replace the mask. And now I'm just going to kick back the vibrance on these. Not even that much. Maybe a little bit of saturation too. Oh, that does not look very good. Let me put that back up a little bit more. There we go. Before... after, yeah, there we go. And so you end up with the background pushed away even further as you go through this. Might be good to put a highlight in at the bottom of the sphere, something along there. But yeah, that's just a few adjustments. Takes about 10 minutes. I think it really polishes up the piece. Just as a reminder, here is the original. Here it is with just a little bit of shading and a little bit of color control put on the background. And I think that that pulls it together a bit more. All right, so that's it. Let's go ahead and look at the next one on the list. Here we go. What was that game, Perfection? Did any of you ever play the game Perfection where you wound up the board and it shot pieces everywhere at you? This kind of reminds me of it. So let's go down the list. I forgot to say, overall, yeah, I think that this was successful. It just needed to be polished up a bit more. I think that it's a little ways away from being done. I think that overall you're getting it. Just a little bit more post-production effects on it, and you'd be there. All right. Anyway, let's come over to this one. Clearly more than one layer for sure. It looks like you were moving these around. I like that effect. I like a lot of these effects. You did a really good job on that. All right, first things first. You are 14 inches by 11 inches, 150 pixels per inch. You are an RGB PNG, named correctly. Perfect. Thank you. So all that's out of the way. Looking good. Okay, so that said, what do we have going on here? Colors are under control. Absolutely. Everything that appears somewhere else as well. Even these little yellow pieces and these kind of fuchsia pieces. If it shows up somewhere else. In other words, it looks like it was intentional, or you're just using the same palette area in it. So you got all that going. You clearly use more than one filter. Absolutely. You have created a focus. Yes, all these pieces not only look like they're coming forward, it looks like they're springing out. I love that. You have areas of disinterest pushed back. That would probably just be the background. You don't want people focusing in on that. And by keeping it monotone, you managed to do that. And by adding this texture that has these textures under it, it creates this feeling that it's almost blurred out a bit, even though there's no actual blur. It's just that you have something layered on top of something layered on top of something. Also, there are no highlights. It's essentially flat as compared to the objects you're bringing forward. The objects you're bringing forward have these maybe brush strokes coming in. Really good. Structure created. It doesn't look like it was randomly thrown together. No, it looks like you did it on purpose, and a big part of that is how you had the pieces seeming to fly out. I would say this is successful. We can play around with it a little bit to see if there's anything else to do. What if I create a dummy layer such as color balance? I don't know. Well, it could be anything. And we'll just roll through, making it brighter. Oh, overlay could have been very good. Multiply. I don't think that's as successful. Screen. I don't think so. Overlay, though, has some interesting effect. I think though it doesn't. Now everything is a little too interesting. I think you made the right call. So let's take a look at, because there's a lot of variation suddenly going on in the background. It became more interesting to look at that than the pieces that are flying forward. What happens if we do it curves? Same problem. As soon as we do too much of an adjustment, we start getting a heavy color change. A slight curve, I think, could benefit it because it separates the background from the foreground, but you have to be careful. I'm going to put this on luminosity real quick. There we go. And so now we have stuff being pulled forward a little bit more and pushed back. So the real genius of this are these little shapes. I mean, it makes it feel like these are springing forward, but there's no real reason for it other than it looks like a trail or a tail coming off. But really, it's just more abstract shapes coming in. I think that's brilliant. Yeah, I'd say overall this is a success. Good job on it. Well done. Okay, so I noticed that this video is coming up to about 30 minutes. I would say my one suggestion here, just toss on a slight curve so you can darken up the background a little bit. But be careful. I put it in luminosity mode. You don't want to accidentally change all the colors of your background so that they become a center of interest. All right, so before we move on to the next stack, let me just say overall, yeah, these last three have been successful. And we will move on. If you want more feedback on this, let me know. I'll be happy to provide additional videos on it. But yeah, I think this covers it. Good work, everyone. On to the next set.